Hello, my name is Cassidy Thompson. Today I will be reflecting on my time observing and teaching my mentor teacher's classroom. There were many things that I observed in the classroom that I feel will better prepare me to be a teacher in the future, especially being able to observe a classroom that is in my specific content area. In the past, I have observed classrooms, but none have been an ASL classroom, so it was very interesting to be able to see the lessons that she thought of that maybe I didn't think of, and the way she implemented her teaching style in the classroom for an ASL content. For my first 4 visits in the classroom, I mainly observed how she taught, what she taught, and the way the students perceived that instruction. And I interacted with them through activities that the teacher had already prepared by passing out papers, grading papers, helping her organize for the next class and for the following day at the end of the day. Because of the population that is surrounding the school in which I observed at, many of the students were from culturally diverse backgrounds and also from socially diverse backgrounds. So it was interesting to see a real life classroom in action and not just the representation that is given most of the time during the study for this type of degree. Throughout my observation, I noticed that my mentor teacher differentiated her lessons to best match these cultural and social backgrounds that these students may have demonstrated that they have, and to best match the needs of the students in what she was teaching. During the lesson that I taught, however, which was on my 5th day of observation and also my last day of observation for this class, the objective was for the students to be able to accurately and appropriately respond to the signs learned, both receptively and expressively, meaning both through seeing someone sign and also through signing themselves at a 90% accuracy. To ensure that the students were learning the adequate content as it was being taught, I used 2 strategies in which I've learned from both observing my mentor teacher and from this class in particular, and also through other classes that I have been in and studied. The first strategy being copying, and this is a typical instructional strategy used in an ASL classroom to ensure that the students are both receiving the sign and also understanding it to its fullest capacity. So what I did in my lesson that was copying was I showed them an image that reflected the sign or the vocabulary that needed to be learned, and then I would sign the corresponding sign or vocab that matched the image. Then the students were expected to then sign the vocabulary back to me. And it would look something like this. I would point at the object, maybe it was an apple, and then I would sign apple, and then they would sign apple back to me. That way I was able to see all of their parameters and make sure they were correct. The copying strategy is implemented to ensure that the student is learning and also demonstrating that they are learning the content as well. And also it gives an opportunity for feedback from the teacher. So I was able to scan the room and see what the students were signing, how they were signing it, and if there was any correction that needed to be given. And I was able to do it in real time rather than waiting for a test or a quiz further down the line. The second strategy that I used was heavily focused on in chapter 8 of the book that we read this semester as a class, and that is grouping strategies. So after the instruction was done and all appropriate content and vocabulary was taught to the students, they were then assigned to group up with their peers in their classroom and complete an activity. And they were in groups between 4 and 5 peers in one group, which allowed them to be able to fully communicate their understanding and different perspectives to the students. That is one of the major upsides of using these types of strategies, these grouping strategies, is that the students are able to see many different perspectives, and not only their own and not only the teachers, but also their peers in the classroom, what they are able to convey and what they perceive from the lesson. Another important aspect of these grouping strategies is that students are able to engage in social context, especially high school students. Being able to truly understand their perspective and how to best communicate with a group is ideal and crucial for students of this age. Before and during the lesson that I taught, I thought there were 2 competencies that truly stuck out to me: competency 4 and competency 10. They were the one that I felt like showed up the most often and that were the most relevant to the particular lesson that I was teaching. Throughout lesson planning, focusing on how students would process the information given and how they would respond to the learning objectives was extremely important, and that reflects most in competency 4. During the lesson, I was able to adjust the lesson to how the students were actively participating and how they were responding to the lesson in real time. And I was able to give them feedback, as I mentioned, with the teaching strategies that I used before. And this is most often shown in competency 10, being able to give feedback, being able to adjust, and being flexible with your students and in the classroom to best educate these students in the particular content and topic that we are talking about. one of the ways that I was able to see if the students were fully understanding the content that was being taught was obviously the copying strategy that I talked about earlier. But additionally, this lesson that I taught was part 1 of 4 subsequent lessons that were taught by my mentor teacher. And of course, after a lesson that I taught, after every class period, we would talk about what I could do better. And throughout the day, it did get significantly more in tune with the particular students that I was teaching. But she did convey to me that throughout the next lessons that she taught, the second and third part of the lesson that she taught that pertained to food vocabulary and food adjacent activities, that the students were able to recall and produce the signs that I taught them in the vocabulary lesson accurately. So not only was I able to in real time see that the students were learning the content, I was then able to go back to my mentor teacher and see that, see and be told that the students were fully understanding the lesson that I taught. Before the lesson was taught, and before the lesson was prepared, my mentor teacher pointed out a few students who would need additional support and instruction throughout the lesson. And there were 2 in particular that came to mind. One was a girl. She was previously in alternative school, and she had not been there for most of the beginning of the semester. I taught my lesson on November 1st, and she had reintegrated into the school that week. I taught on a Friday, and it was that week that she had got back to school. My mentor teacher let me know that she may struggle and need more attention given because she was not given the full background knowledge because she was in the alternative school. So one of the strategies that I used with the student was being extra attentive while the copying strategy was being used, making sure that I was giving her additional feedback that I may not have been giving all of the students. That way, because she doesn't have the background knowledge, she was able to learn as much as she could from the lesson. During the lesson, she responded very, very well. And after the lesson, she was a little bit confused on how the procedure would go with the grouping activity. So I was scanning the room and made sure that I kept coming back to those students who were in her group. That way she was not being isolated from the group activity, but that she was being supported extra, and also her peers in the group were able to support her as well. In the end of the lesson, she was able to fully convey at least 90% of the vocabulary, and she ended up passing her unit test. So that was a great success for her. One of the other students was a boy. He is taking ASL 1 for a second time because he failed the last time. So he does have all background knowledge, has taken the class, and has learned this unit before. So she did convey to me that he may be a little distracted and feel like he already knows the information that is going to be given. So to ensure that he was fully supported in the fact that he has already learned most of the vocabulary that was being taught in the previous year because he's having to retake the class, I allowed him to come up to the front of the class, and he was able to teach a few signs before class started during their warm-up that he thought were important and things that he had remembered from the previous year. This is not typical, but for someone who has taken the class before and feels almost, for lack of better words, redundant being in the class again, even though they do need to get the credit, it is important that you praise them for what they already know. Because he already knew some of the content that was being taught, I was able to support him and allow him to come up to the front of the class. He was able to help other students in his group and in other groups as his group was finished with the group activity, and was able to give them additional feedback that maybe someone learning this lesson for the first time was not able to give. And he as well passed his unit test with the mentor teacher. So that was also very successful for him. And obviously these types of adaptations for all students would not be appropriate or accurate to match their needs and their learning styles, but for these 2 students, they were very successful. And that was something that my mentor teacher commented on when we were discussing the lesson after the fact. Lastly, throughout my mentorship, I was able to interact with students both through conversation and through instruction. And a common topic that was talked on, and it's been talked on for many classes throughout my study at Lamar, is being culturally responsive. This is a very important idea, especially as we grow and learn and become teachers, that not all of our students are going to be the same, and they're all going to come from different places, being taught by different people. And it's important to make sure that our expectations of their prerequisite knowledge is accurate for the knowledge that they should have, and not expect more or less of these students that may come from different backgrounds than we ourselves have come from. One of the strategies that we talked about many times in this class particularly was representation, making sure that your students feel fully represented in the classroom and through the instruction that is given, whether that be through videos, through pictures, through books, through posters on the walls, through the way that you talk, making sure that they are feeling like they are a part of the class fully and like they're not being missed in the representation of the class. So one thing that I was extra attentive of, because I am stepping into someone's classroom and it's not my own. I can't put things up on the wall, and I can't expect her to allow me to do that. In my presentation PowerPoint that I made to assist with the lesson, I made sure that there were representations of the culturally diverse students that I know was going to be teaching. This is a very important aspect of going in and observing the classroom before you just hop right in and teach the class. I was able to know the students that I was going to be teaching, know the different types of people with different backgrounds and cultures and social backgrounds, and be able to match that in the presentation. So though most of it was food related, so it was just food pictures, I was able to make sure that any person represented in the PowerPoint was diverse, that it wasn't all just the same type of person, the same gender, race, and make sure that my students feel fully represented by the presentation that I was giving. This is something that I definitely saw with my mentor teacher in many of her lessons, but one that just comes to mind is her lesson over description, and it was about clothing and hair and food and how you would describe that and how you would show that rather than just using sign. Some were signs, some were not. And the hairstyles that she chose, the clothing that she chose, the food that she chose showed cultural responsiveness. She didn't just show straight blonde hair, she showed curly blonde hair, she showed braids and protective styles, and she showed short hair and long hair. She showed different types of cultural outfits and how you would describe those whenever you're signing, and the foods from different cultures, she also showed those. And this was just one of the ways that she was culturally responsive in her classroom to be able to match the needs and expectations of the students that she had. Not only that, but the interactions that she had with the student that I was able to observe and the interactions I was able to have with the students. Ensuring that you know where they're coming from, know things that may be uncomfortable for them to talk about, and knowing that some of the students are going to be uncomfortable in certain situations that me as a teacher may not be uncomfortable with. They may be completely uncomfortable with that, and that is an extremely important aspect to the learning process, being fully supported in your classroom. In closing, one of my major takeaways is that no classroom is going to be the same. Walking into a classroom can be very difficult as a student teacher. One thing that I am extremely grateful for is that my mentor teacher was completely supportive of my lesson and how I wanted to teach it, and the style that I wanted to teach it in as I'm growing into a teacher and learning the style that's best for me and for the students. I appreciate everything that my mentor teacher did for me, and the lessons and the knowledge that she was able to give me throughout my semester in her classroom. I'm extremely excited to start my clinical teaching, and I had a very successful semester with the help of a mentor teacher and Dr. Head. Thank you.